I think it's a testament to the Dutch government's leadership on issues of great import and the important and catalytic role that you play here within the diplomatic community. So thanks to you and your government. Over the last 5 years of brutal conflict in Syria, these last 2 weeks have been especially bleak. And in Aleppo, thousands are trapped in a maelstrom of death, hospitals and schools targeted, white helmets turned red with blood, and at some point the words utterly fail to capture the depravity that we see glimpses of. But the Assad regime's recent atrocities in Aleppo, while among the most heinous, trace a much longer pattern of violence and injustice against the Syrian people, one that fueled the horrific conflict in the first place. It was 5 years ago in Daraa when a group of young boys, one just 10 years old, were rounded up for criticizing the regime, were stripped naked and hung by the wrists as they were beaten with metal rods over weeks of detention. And that abuse, not just the young targets, but its abject cruelty, came to symbolize the regime's broader violence and sense of impunity. And it helped stoke the conflict, as did thousands more arrests and abuses by the regime in the following years. Since 2011, more than 215,000 people have been detained in Syrian prisons because of the conflict. 17,000 have died in those prisons from torture. And men and women who are still behind bars are held in appalling conditions and endure all manner of abuse, including sexual violence. For the men and women who do make it out, many now struggle to escape its lingering trauma. The overwhelming number of former detainees in these prisons now live in Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and Syria. And each day they try to rebuild what the Assad regime tried to break. They seek to reconnect with their families and their communities and move forward with their lives. And these are brave individuals whose trauma is both unique and collective. They are the surgeon who can no longer operate because her hands tremble with trauma. They're the father who withdraws from his children, hoping to protect them somehow from the pain that he endured. The activist whose friends now shun him because he was assaulted behind bars. They share a reality of wounded families, communities, and their entire society. We must stand with them now to provide aid, but also to advance the cause of justice for which they sacrificed. So today, the United States joins with many of your governments in making 2 new moral and financial commitments. First, we announced $1.4 million for the Syria Survivors of Torture Initiative. This effort will pilot a more comprehensive model of assistance to former detainees by helping to close the gaps in medical, psychosocial, and legal services, by reconnecting former detainees with their communities and loved ones, and by supporting advocacy to sustain attention on their particular needs, because we cannot move on from this issue until they are able to move on with their lives. And finally, these funds will foster ties between those providing services to former detainees, like medical and legal aid, with those who document human rights abuses, because the nurse who examines the survivor, the paralegal who transcribes the account, and the advocate who presses for justice will be stronger when they all work together. And on this last piece in particular, ensuring justice for atrocities in Syria, we have much work ahead. Helping Syrians negotiate a peaceful political transition and defeat terrorist groups like Daesh must go hand in hand with the pursuit of justice for the many crimes that have already been committed. For as we've seen time and time again, peace without justice is always frail. So today, the second commitment that the United States makes is an additional $1.45 million to support the Syrian Justice and Accountability Center's tireless work in documenting the human rights abuses in Syria committed by all sides. The SJAC recognizes that while many Syrians cannot defend themselves from atrocities, they can deploy their phones, their video cameras, and their cassette recorders to document these atrocities. Over the last 4 years, the SJAC has collected terabytes of documentation in this way, and each piece that comes in receives multiple tags for analysis and undergoes a thorough assessment to ensure that it can be used in future processes for transitional justice, whatever form they may take. Too often in this horrific conflict, the Assad regime, Daesh, and other warring parties have committed atrocities to silence those with a different vision of Syria. The activists defending human rights, the women demanding equality, or the young person calling for accountable governance. We cannot let them succeed. So even as we seek to end violence in Syria through a negotiated political transition that has been all too elusive, as the ambassador said, the international community must now help the survivors of atrocities to recover their voices, regain their lives, and ensure that their stories survive for all time and for justice. The two groups that we support today, and we thank you very much for your work and for being here, they do this work often at great peril. They deserve not just our resources and our assistance, but they also deserve to be kept at the foremost of our thoughts. And so I hope that the governments here today will make specific commitments to support these efforts, because if people like Mr. al-Abdullah can endure Syrian prison twice for justice and for human rights, we can certainly do all we can at this moment in history to ensure that he is able to move forward and that the country can move forward and that those who have committed the crimes that we cannot fully describe pay.